The night was unusually quiet as I pulled into the parking lot of the Gas and Go for my first overnight shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unnatural glow across the empty forecourt. As I parked my beat-up Honda beside the ice machine, I'd taken this job out of desperation, needing something to pay the bills while I finished my degree, and the night shift paid better than days. The manager had been surprisingly eager to hire me, barely glancing at my application before offering me the position. "Not many people want to work the graveyard shift out here," he'd said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It gets lonely, being 30 miles from town." I hadn't thought much of it then, but as I approached the glass doors reflecting my tired face back at me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Inside, the store was clinically bright and sterile, rows of snacks and drinks arranged with military precision. The previous shift worker, a gaunt man named Earl, with deep-set eyes and a perpetual nervous twitch, barely acknowledged me as I entered. He mumbled something about the register being counted, and then hurried through his closing tasks, glancing repeatedly at the clock on the wall. "One piece of advice," he said suddenly, as he was about to leave, his hand gripping the door handle so tightly his knuckles whitened. "If anyone comes in between 2 and 4 a.m. asking to use the phone because their car broke down, don't let them. Call the police instead." Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him as he practically ran to his car. I stood there for a moment, confused by his warning, but assuming it was some kind of joke they played on new employees. The shop fell silent except for the persistent hum of the refrigerators and the occasional drip from the coffee machine that hadn't been properly emptied. For the first few hours, everything was normal. A few truckers stopped for coffee and diesel. A group of teenagers bought snacks on their way back from a party, and an elderly couple asked for directions to the highway. I cleaned the coffee station, restocked the coolers, and tried to stay awake by reading a paperback I'd brought along. It was around 1:30 a.m. when the bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see a woman in a pale blue dress standing at the entrance. Something immediately felt off about her. Despite the chilly night, she wore no jacket, and her dress looked outdated, like something from the 1950s. Her hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place, and she stood completely still, just staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can I help you?" I called out. But she didn't respond immediately. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering my question, before slowly walking toward the counter, her movements strangely fluid yet mechanical at the same time. "I seem to have had some car trouble," she finally said, her voice oddly melodic, yet flat, lacking any real emotion. "May I use your phone?" Her request sent a chill down my spine as I remembered Earl's warning. Looking at her more closely, I noticed other disturbing details. Her skin had an almost waxy appearance under the harsh store lights, and though she was standing right in front of me, I couldn't hear her breathing. When she smiled, it was too wide, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too numerous and perfectly aligned. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The phone lines are down tonight. There's a service station about 5 miles down the road that might be able to help." It was a lie, of course, but something deep inside was screaming at me to get her out of the store. Her smile didn't falter, but something flickered in her eyes. A momentary darkness that made my heart race. That's unfortunate, she said, still smiling that impossible smile. Perhaps I could wait here until morning. It's not safe for a lady to be alone on these roads at night. I was about to respond when headlights swept across the windows as a semi-truck pulled into the lot, and I'd never been so relieved to see a customer in my life. When I glanced back from the window, the woman was gone, not walking away, not heading to another aisle, simply gone, as if she'd never been there at all. The truck driver, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, gave me a curious look as he entered. "You all right, kid? You look like you've seen a ghost." His casual comment made my skin crawl. I managed a weak smile and rang up his purchases: coffee, beef jerky, and energy drinks, while fighting the urge to ask if he'd seen the woman in the blue dress. As he left, I checked every aisle, the restrooms, even the storage room, but found no trace of her. The security camera footage showed her entering, approaching the counter, and then simply disappearing when I looked away, like a glitch in the recording. My hands shook as I rewound and played it again, unable to believe what I was seeing. The timestamp on the footage read 2:13 a.m., squarely within the time frame Earl had warned me about. The night grew heavier. After that, the darkness outside seeming to press against the windows with physical weight. The fluorescent lights began to flicker intermittently, creating momentary pockets of shadow that my eyes couldn't quite penetrate. The refrigerator units started making strange noises, not their usual mechanical hum, but something that almost sounded like whispered words just below the threshold of comprehension. I tried calling my manager, but as I feared, the phone line was actually dead now, producing only a low, atonal buzz when I held it to my ear. My cell phone showed no service, which was unusual even for this remote location. I was effectively cut off, alone in this island of artificial light, surrounded by miles of empty countryside. With each passing minute, the store felt less like a place of business and more like a trap slowly closing around me. At 3:04 a.m., the bell chimed again. This time, a man entered, tall and rail-thin, wearing a filthy trucker cap and oil-stained coveralls. He nodded at me and headed straight for the coffee machine, filling a cup with movements that seemed too precise, too measured. "Working the night shift alone?" he asked, his voice strangely hollow, as if speaking from the bottom of a well. Bold choice for these parts. He approached the counter, his eyes never blinking, fixed on me with an intensity that made my mouth go dry. As he placed his coffee down, I noticed his hands. The fingers were too long, the joints bending at unnatural angles, and the skin had an odd, translucent quality that revealed shadows of something moving beneath. "You wouldn't happen to have a phone I could use?" he asked, his mouth stretching into a grin that revealed yellowed teeth filed to points. "My truck broke down just up the road, and I need to call for help." The memory of Earl's warning screamed in my mind, along with the woman's identical request earlier. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "The phones are down tonight." His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the store seemed to drop several degrees in an instant. I could see my breath misting in front of my face now, though he produced no such vapor when he spoke. "That's a shame," he said, reaching across the counter with those impossible fingers. moving faster than I could react. His cold skin brushed against my wrist, sending a jolt of something ancient and malevolent through my body. Perhaps there's another way you could help me. The lights flickered violently then, and in the momentary darkness, I caught a glimpse of what stood before me. Not a man at all, but something wearing the approximation of human form, like an ill-fitting suit, its true nature bleeding through the seams of its disguise. When the lights stabilized, he was standing impossibly close, though I hadn't seen him move. "We've been watching you," he whispered, his breath smelling of soil and decay. "Everyone who works here. We've been watching for a very long time." My heart hammered against my ribs as I backed away, the counter between us suddenly feeling like inadequate protection. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice barely more than a whisper. The thing wearing a man's shape tilted its head at an angle no human neck could achieve. "Just a little company," it said, the words coming out distorted, as if its mouth wasn't designed to form human speech. "It gets lonely out here on the road. Sometimes we need somewhere warm to rest. Sometimes we need someone warm to take with us." As it spoke, I became aware of movement outside the windows, shadowy figures gathering in the darkness beyond the reach of the forecourt lights. They stood completely still, watching, waiting. I counted 6, then 8, then lost track as more arrived, each one shaped like a person, but wrong in ways I couldn't fully process. Their outlines seemed to waver and shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, as if they existed partially in some other place. The creature before me must have sensed my growing terror, because its mouth stretched into that terrible grin again. "You're not the first to work here," it said conversationally, running one elongated finger along the counter's edge, leaving a trail of dark moisture that sizzled against the laminate. The others, they weren't very hospitable, refused to let us use the phone, you see, refused to help travelers in need. It gestured toward the windows, toward the gathering crowd of not quite human shapes. Those were the lucky ones. They only had to watch as we took their replacements. The uncooperative ones. It trailed off, making a sound that might have been a laugh, but sounded more like rocks grinding together. "Well, let's just say they're still with us, in their own way." As if on cue, one of the figures outside stepped closer to the glass, pressing what should have been a face against it. With mounting horror, I recognized the gaunt features of Earl, my predecessor, his eyes now empty black pits, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. In that moment of recognition and terror, something unexpected happened. The security system suddenly blared to life, its alarm piercing the unnatural silence. The creatures outside recoiled from the noise, their forms becoming less solid, more smoke-like. The one inside hissed, a sound no human throat could produce, its disguise slipping further to reveal glimpses of something chitinous and segmented beneath. "Someone tripped the silent alarm," it snarled, its voice now multi-layered and discordant. "You're more clever than you look." But I hadn't touched any alarm. Then I remembered the truck driver from earlier, the only real customer I'd had since the woman in the blue dress appeared. Had he sensed something wrong? Had he somehow known what was happening here? The creature's form was becoming increasingly unstable, patches of its human disguise peeling away like burning paper to reveal glistening, obsidian-like surfaces underneath. It lunged across the counter, impossibly fast, those elongated fingers stretching toward my throat. I scrambled backward, knocking over a display rack that crashed between us. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching, real help, actual human beings coming to my rescue. The creature let out a sound that made my ears ring and my vision blur, a high-pitched keening that seemed to vibrate the very air around us. "This isn't over," it hissed, its voice now completely inhuman, resonating from somewhere beyond its apparent physical form. "We've been here long before this place was built. We'll be here long after it's gone. And when shift change comes again, when a new face stands behind this counter, we'll return." The lights flickered violently, plunging the store into complete darkness for several long seconds. When they came back on, the creature was gone, along with all the shadowy figures outside. The only evidence of their presence was the strange, sizzling residue on the counter and the lingering smell of ozone and decay that permeated the air. Through the windows, I could see red and blue lights approaching in the distance, and I sank to the floor behind the counter, shaking uncontrollably, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers, with concerned faces and hands resting cautiously on their holsters. They found me huddled behind the counter, barely able to form coherent sentences as I tried to explain what had happened. They exchanged glances I couldn't interpret as they inspected the store, noting the knocked-over display rack and the strange residue on the counter that was already hardening into something that looked like black volcanic glass. "We got a call from a trucker about 20 minutes ago," the older officer explained, his weathered face grim. "Said he stopped here earlier and got a bad feeling. Claimed the place had the wrong kind of air about it, whatever that means. Insisted we come check it out." The younger officer was reviewing the security footage, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Sir," he called to his partner, "you need to see this." On the screen, the footage showed exactly what I had seen earlier: customers entering, the woman disappearing, the tall man approaching the counter. But what it didn't show was any of the impossible things I had witnessed. No elongated fingers, no filed teeth, no inhuman movements. Just ordinary, if somewhat odd, customers. "Son," the older officer said, placing a firm hand on my shoulder, "we're going to need to take you in for a statement." His tone was kind, but left no room for argument. As they escorted me outside, the dawn was just breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed impossibly beautiful after the terror of the night. One of the officers wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, mistaking my shivering for cold rather than lingering fear. As we approached their cruiser, I glanced back at the gas and go one last time and froze. There, in the second-floor window of a building that I knew for certain was a single-story structure, stood a row of faces pressed against the glass. Earl was there, along with others I didn't recognize, their expressions vacant and hopeless, and standing behind them, its form towering and indistinct, was something far larger than any of the creatures I'd seen during the night, its outline suggesting limbs and appendages that had no place on any earthly being. I never returned to the Gas and Go, not even to collect my final paycheck. The police investigation concluded that I had experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination, possibly triggered by the isolation of working overnight in such a remote, location. The strange residue on the counter was dismissed as some kind of industrial cleaner that had been improperly stored. No one could explain the security footage showing the woman vanishing, so they simply ignored it. 3 weeks later, I received a call from my former manager, his voice tense and slightly desperate. "We need someone to cover the night shift," he said without preamble, "just until we can find a permanent replacement." I declined as politely as I could, given that my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Later that day, I drove past the station out of morbid curiosity. There was a "Help Wanted" sign in the window, and a young woman behind the counter, looking bored and checking her watch. I considered stopping, warning her about what happened between 2 and 4 a.m., about the phone calls and the things that weren't quite human. Instead, I drove on, telling myself she wouldn't believe me anyway. 6 months later, I was pumping gas at a station 50 miles away when I overheard two truckers talking. Weird stuff happening at that gas and go out on Highway 16. One was saying, "Third employee gone missing in as many months. Police can't figure it out. No signs of struggle. Cars still in the lot, register untouched." His companion nodded grimly. "Heard they've got security footage of the last one. Girl just stands there at the counter, then looks up suddenly, like she's seen something, gets this strange expression on her face, walks out from behind the counter, and heads straight out the door into the dark, never comes back into frame." The first trucker shook his head. "You couldn't pay me enough to stop there, especially not at night. Something ain't right about that place." As they walked away, I felt a familiar chill run down my spine. I finished pumping my gas and got back in my car, hands trembling as I started the engine. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of someone watching me from across the forecourt. A woman in a pale blue dress, her smile too wide, her eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. And though I drove well over the speed limit all the way home, checking my rearview mirror constantly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, patient and ancient and hungry, waiting for the moment when I would find myself alone again in the dark.